Talking about children, you know, now it seems that the environment at home was absolutely cold. It was not a homely place. It was not a nice place, considering the cold was, there's the physical abuse. How were the children coping with all that?
Weirdly enough, the masks worked. The masks worked in the house because as far as my children were present, best behavior.
Oh,
Yes. So my children, up until towards the very, very end, they only experienced very few situations. And in fact, it's way after that I've realized that they experienced some of those situations. So my kids, so actually, in actual sense, my home was unhappy for me. My home was not unhappy for the rest of the inhabitants.
so what you're saying is when it was the two of you, it was
Even
Vietnam.
when there was someone else involved, he would get ways, he would throw comments.
But when the children are there, it's peaceful.
You see, the thing with marriage is that when you're parenting, you find there's a primary parent and then there's a parent who sometimes comes home
Co-parent.
baadaye. So one of the other things that had happened in 2016, no, me being out of it with the kids, and then I was living in a compound where I had family. And so the children would really get to spend a lot of time with other family members, with cousins, with aunties and the like. But as the year progressed, it did become toxic. As we went towards the end of 2016, it now did begin to become toxic, even for my children. So much so that I have now learned that they are old enough to share those experiences. They did go through some things at his hand as well that I did not know about because I checked out. So when I talked to my mom about what was happening, she enrolled me in a psychology class. And it's in the middle of this psychology class that light bulbs went off. And I suddenly realized the name of what I was living with in my house. But I didn't do anything about it because I was in church. Where do you begin with a divorce story? God hates divorce. You will, and also losing my marriage was beyond losing a spouse for me. Losing my marriage was losing my identity. And losing my marriage was failing at what I considered the most basic function of a female.
Yes.
Like from when you are a baby, you like a small girl, dollies look after you, a toto look after this, chamama chababa, you're playing the role of a wife. Like you've been coached for this all along, and then you had 7 years to date this man, and you can't do it. Like what level of failure is this? So I wasn't gonna walk away. How? So my family couldn't know because if you bring in violence and my family, they will pick you up themselves.
Of course. Yeah.
So two things happened. I got knowledge of what I was suffering, like what it is, what the problem was. I understood the name of this problem. And for me, my basic translation, and I know this word gets thrown around so much, but I firmly believe that I was dealing with a textbook case of a narcissist. Someone who thought the world revolved around him, and my very function in life was to serve and please him as master. But then, while I got the information, I wasn't mature still. And so I did what an immature person does with information. And I wreaked havoc.
Wow.
Not in a bad way. The fights that I couldn't fight physically, I fought with my mouth.
Okay.
And looking back, one of my lowest lows, you know, like those things you wish you could go back and change,
Yes.
was things that I said in those moments. And I think every platform I've had a chance, I keep saying it like this, it wasn't a him problem, it was an us problem.
Sure.
Whatever level of narcissism he would bring, I handled it with good and total marinated immaturity, you know, like a good kiwango.
Okay.
So yeah, so as the year progressed, the more 2016 went on, the more I began to think about separation. And it became a real thing. Yeah.
And it became a reality. Then still, you were hosting a show.
No, at that point I would be a guest on the show. I had not begun hosting it yet. I would begin hosting the show, nearly a year. But while all of this was happening, I was not hosting the show, but I was a regular.
You were
And
a
I was a
regular.
regular in pastoral capacity. And at that point, the show was talking about marriage and relationships.
Yet your
And
marriage is going through rocks.
hell, you know. But here's the thing, and that's what I mean. It's different to have knowledge, and it's one thing to have knowledge, and it's another to have wisdom. Those are two different levels. And it's one thing to have knowledge, and it's another to know. Knowledge is the acquisition of information. Wisdom is the understanding of how to utilize the information that you've gotten. So I had knowledge, but I did not have wisdom. And you see, knowledge is easy because I can come here and share knowledge. You have no way of knowing whether I have transformed the knowledge into wisdom in my own life. And you know, if I share knowledge, and you take the knowledge and apply it in your life, you will benefit from the wisdom, and I will still remain
With the
an
knowledge.
ignorant person with knowledge. Yeah.
That is deep. So I don't know whether you'd be comfortable enough to tell us about.
No worries.
Now you began hosting the show. Then when you were hosting the show is when now you probably finalized your divorce, and you know you changed your name and all that. How was that?
No, in 2016, first and foremost, in 2016, in 2016 things got bad, and I think it's important for me to point this out. I nearly got into an affair towards the end of 2016, and that was driven by one, my immaturity, the desire to wound him as bad as he had wounded me, because there had been so many things going on in the course of this, including relationships that I did not think were appropriate for the office we were serving in, for the marital status, for the relationship that I had with the other people involved. There were relationships he was carrying on that to me were just disrespectful. And so many things had happened in 2016 that had gotten to the point of realizing I did not have a marriage technically, but we needed to make it work because of the children, because of this.
Church, yeah.
And every time we would get into a fight, we would go through a honeymoon phase. So in October of 2016, we got into a really bad fight. A really, really bad, terrible fight. Like, he beat me up so bad that I had vaginal bleeding for about a week. He beat me up so bad, I ended up without nails, without chunks of hair. I wasn't at a quiet being beaten, yeah? So I did my fair share of harm, but body size different meant that I came out with more injuries. And honestly, that night I thought he would kill me. But the only problem was I was so fed up with this life that was the easiest exit. You're going to kill me, today is the day. And so I would taunt him the entire time. Finally, I think when I actually realized he was going to kill me, and at this point, what we are fighting about is picking a bag and money so that I can come home. At this point, I was ready to come home. I was ready to come home and tell my mom exactly what had been happening. At this point, my mom knew a lot, except the violence. And ironically, when I opened up to my mom, I found that for years, he had been feeding information to my family about how terrible the marriage is, but as a result of the bad wife. And so whenever I came home and I was in a bad mood, my family would conclude amekuja kuharibu huko vile anaharibu kwake, as opposed to them being able to see. And that was the case with friends, because grooming involves cutting away your support system. So he had managed to get my support system, including my colleagues in church, had managed to completely set me up as a villain. And so at this point when this is happening, I've discovered some of these things. I've discovered that people have been praying for me, for him, because of the terrible wife. Yeah? And so I was in a place where I really didn't care. And that fight, when I was rescued, the next morning I woke up in a puddle of blood, and all I felt was hatred. Hatred, like, oof, deep. And by the time I woke up, there was already messages apologizing, but I was done. And the sad part about October 2016, I wasn't done with him. I was done with him and his children. I was done. I did not care. Like, I was out of it. As far as I was concerned, I was only raising miniature hymns.
Sure.
They would grow up and they would hurt me the same way that he had hurt me. And so when I left that night, I left everything. I left my children. I left it. I wanted nothing. I wanted to go get a bedsitter, get a mattress, and start life over. but we had to sit down for counseling.
Yes.
And you know, when the anger dissipates, you begin to think about what does walking away mean.
Yes.
And at that point, I could still see my failures as a wife. I had not made it to Proverbs 31. And maybe if I strived a little bit more, I would make it. I began to host the show in 2017.
Okay.
At the point I began to host the show, there was a slightly different version of me happening.
What
And
was the name of the show?
Women's View. And so as we began to do the show, there was a number of things happening. And one of those things was that I had grown, and I had grown as pioneer, and I could stand up for myself on one level. I could defend myself. I had learned that I didn't need to engage in a shouting match
Yes.
for things to work out. So my demeanor had changed. My approach to life and how I looked at things had changed, and I had stopped being a victim. Because in October 2016, the only thing that it's either I die or I come out a victor, not a victim. And so even though I went back to my marriage, I remember going back in a month later, because we were separated for about a month and a half. And while we're separated, the families don't know. Only his family knows I'm not in my house. My family don't know.
And where are the children?
I did not care. They were with their father. But after about a week of me being in this mood, I began to see them. But it was like we were getting to know each other, afresh. And at this point, I began to see that my children had become who they had become because of the pain. My pain was reflecting on them, and they also had their own pain. And so when I came back to the marriage, I came back with two things in mind. Number one, my relationship with my children had to change. And number two, my relationship with me had to change. And then finally, my relationship with him had to change. My relationship with myself, because I had to set boundaries.
Yes.
Protecting boundaries to keep me in and unwanted whatever's out. Boundaries to ensure that I took care of my mental and emotional wellness. Him, because he needed to know that there are no boundaries and that there will be consequences for these boundaries. And if there is ever a choice between life and you, I will choose life.
Sure.
And for my kids, because I needed them to understand that it wasn't their fault, that they didn't do anything. And I needed them to understand that if I did make any decision, I would make it for me. I wasn't going to live for them anymore or anybody else. And that did not mean that I did not love them. As a matter of fact, I really wanted to get to know them and be friends. And so 2017 came with changes. We began homeschooling. So my kids, I became a full-time caregiver to my children. And at first we said with tutors, but within a short period of time, I began to realize I didn't know my kids. I didn't know, I would get info on what they liked eating. I would get info on what they liked wearing. I didn't know my kids. And that needed to change. So we began to get to know each other.
Yes.
And I began to open up to them about me as well.
Okay.
And Mr. began to realize that there were boundaries, and the boundaries were going to remain so. And that made things a little bit harder. Hosting the show at this point was easy and hard, because at that point I was a pastor. I was still married, and that year wasn't very, very bad for my marriage as far as I knew. Kumbe, there were things happening in the background. And number three, I was now hosting a show, which meant you were in scrutiny. So you wear your mask better.
Yeah, you're in the limelight.
Yes, you wear your mask better.
So you had become good at wearing this mask. You had
Yes, I had.
perfected
But
it.
then now with the show, what happened with the show is hearing people talk about their lives.
Yes.
And having and I needed my guests to be vulnerable, and so that meant I had to be vulnerable.
Sure.
And in my vulnerability, I began to deal with my own feelings. Yeah. And at this point, a few of my friends knew what was happening, and a few people began to see the problem as well. And so they would call me out and tell me, you can't allow this kind of behavior, and you can't. So I had a bit of a support system, and I had an amazing team. From my producer to the guys that were working on the cameras. Even when I came in looking like death warmed over, they would make me look good and nobody would know that my life was falling apart, you know. And then fast forward to the end of 2017, I chose to resign from ministry. Not because of anything much,
Okay.
but just because it no longer made sense to me. I'm sorry, this is going to be very hurtful, but I find the church to be very fake.
Okay.
Yeah? I find that when I needed genuine love and genuine concern and someone to genuinely tell me that this one is right for you and this is wrong for you, or even when I needed someone to tell me, child, you're being immature, people were too busy telling me, pray some more, read this some more, as opposed to actually dealing with a human being. And so when time came that that environment didn't work for me anymore, I struggled. I felt like Jonah, you know, like Nineveh, like you'll go and then 3 days later a whale will bring you back.
Yeah.
But then ultimately, I think life is full of choices. Yeah, life is full of choices and walking
So you
away.
feel that the church did not give you a practical solution or answers to what you were going through practically? They were just saying you pray and that's it.
Well, that was practical to them.
Wow.
That was, you see, that worked for them. And I tried it and it didn't work for me.
you, yeah.
And now the problem becomes that there can't be a textbook remedy
Yes.
for the problems of life. You can't just come in and tell people, hii ndio inatatwa, kunywa maji, naumwa na kichwa, kunywa maji, naumwa na tumbo, kunywa maji, nimegongwa mguu, kunywa maji. You know, I think it's necessary for us to be more realistic.
Sure.
And I think it's important for us, not just as church people or, you know, religious people, but as human beings. I think it's really important for us to be very genuine with each other and be able to say, my sister hapo umenikosea, as opposed to carrying grudges. You get? Or be able to come and say, Mr. Man, you're hurting our daughter here. Like, you can't just keep sending women to go and pray and they're being battered. You can't keep sending women to war room and with sticky notes. And the verse I struggled the most with was 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, love is this. But that was the love I was supposed to be giving. I was supposed to be giving love that was patient, that was kind, that was all of these things. But then the question becomes, is there reciprocity? You get? Because I'm not God. I'm a human being. And as a human being, I have needs. And now, beyond that, there was also, and this is sensitive because we are in a political year, one of the other things that happened to me in 2017 was there were splits in my life where suddenly every year as we're getting to elections, people remember. People you've been friends with all your life remember Mount Kenya Mafia Niwezi. All Luos are like this. And now with the church, that became very tangible. Based on who is leading prayer, you can tell political inclination. And for me, that wasn't working.
Yes, because the church should
exactly,
be neutral.
neutral.
Yes.
You can't have the church in Thika, the Lord has spoken to them like this, and then the one in Kiamba, the Lord has spoken like this, the one in another area, in Eldoret, their direction is different, in Kisumu, their direction is different, because then that means we are not worshiping the same God. So I began to question, is the problem God or the church? I decided it was the church. So I did not walk away from God. I walked away from the church.
Good clarification there.
So I resigned, but I was still married. And then about 3 months later, I ended my marriage.
How was that for you? Now, how did your family take it? How did your mom take it?
Resigning from church?
No, your marriage.
Or my marriage
Ending your marriage. How did they take it? How did you break
They were
the
not
news?
involved.
From the beginning, they didn't even know what you were going through, right?
The day I realized, the day I decided I was done with my marriage, there was no fight.
Okay.
So there was nothing for my family to come and respond to. I did not need to be rescued. I was just done.
Then, did you have a conversation with your children and tell them, now this is how it's going to be?
Oh, not before. That one I struggled with because the day I ended, like the day this is the moment, like this marriage is over and I've walked away. I remember sitting somewhere in Westlands and just thinking, 14 and a half years of my life. 14 and a half years. I have just taken all of that and I've flashed it down the drain. Like, okay, pause. What am I supposed to tell my children? What am I supposed to tell my mom? What am I supposed to tell the people looking for the wedding? What am I supposed to tell anybody? And I remember sitting in Westlands and just thinking, by the way, my life is over. It's over. And I called my younger sister and we just talked. For her, she was aware what was happening and she knew what was going. She was the only person who knew what I was going to do. Her and my producer. And on the day I'm ending this marriage, I have a work event that I have to put my mask back on and go and deal with this. Talking to my children took a week. And probably they thought their dad was away on a work trip anyway. So I had to get counseling. I actually had to get a script for what to say to them because I did not want to cause them any more trauma that they had gone through.
Yes.
But it was hard. Oh, we cried. The first, and we've cried. Oh my gosh, it's been 4 years, but we have had our pillow and tear parties, and we would sit, and sometimes it would be like over breakfast, and someone just asks one question, and we spiral.
Okay.
Getting my children through meant that I had to be very vulnerable with them.
Yeah.
And I had to allow them to see my pain. Not the details of my pain, but the expression of my pain. Because then they would know it was okay for them to feel the way they felt. And they pleaded, they begged, especially my youngest, like, can't you work things out? Can't you do this? And even at that point, they did not think there was finality. They thought it was a separation as we got counsel. And it took a few more months for me to be able to tell them that I have filed for divorce and this is what's actually going to happen. Living an abusive relationship or marriage is hard. It's not like kwaheri ya kuonana, like bye, we are good, I'll see you later. And not even abusive. I think just living a marriage is difficult because there are people who feel like there should be justification.
Yes.
And there's always the fight for who will have the final word. But about 3 days after I decided to walk away, a friend of mine told me that, you know what, the way you're going to survive this is to shut up. And that's very hard when you're a sanguine, yeah? You get a text and you want to, to respond. But I had to grow up. I had to pick and choose what to respond to. I had to pick and choose what was a priority to me, and that's how I came back home. That's how I came back to Thika. Because Thika was home, Thika was where my family was, Thika was where I was raised. And Thika, I had a support system. Where I was, I did not have one. My kids have gone on to suffer from panic attacks. Right now, all of us, actually the three of us, right now they are reduced. But in the beginning, they were really bad. For my youngest, when she couldn't reach me, they would be terrible. I don't think you will survive losing 14 and a half years without therapy. I have had lots of therapy. Yes. And the hardest part about therapy is you go in and you want to say, alifanya. And then your therapist says, this is your session. Can we talk about what you did? And that forces you to pause and see it differently. Like, it wasn't the doing of one person. Yeah. We both contributed. You may feel like the other person did more damage. But, I mean, how do you justify kidogo and a lot more damage?
Yeah, there's no meter, so to speak.
Yes. Adjusting to life by ourselves was hard. I had never lived alone. Like, I've never had my own bedroom, You grow up at home, sharing your room with siblings, you move in, you're with hubby. I had never been completely on my own. Like, kukiwa na airlock ni shida yako, signal ya DSTV kipotea ni shida. Amna maji, that's your problem. Yeah. Landlord is coming, that's your problem. There were things that I had to deal with, paying bills and the financial well-being of the family, having been the main breadwinner for the longest period of my marriage. So those I was used to. But see, you go make money, you come hand over money, then he handles the plumbers and the whoever. Now, it's just me. And a couple of months before I ended my marriage, my sister had just come to live with us, my younger sister. That I think was the best thing that ever happened to me. My sister coming over. And this time round, I was done with masks. I was in my feels and I was in pain. And one of the things I did was the show. With time, there were adjustments being made to the show that were not going to work with where my emotional stamina was.
At that point.
Yes.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, I needed the scrutiny to stop.
Okay.
I needed to just be able, not scrutiny to stop. If I was going to do this show, I was going to do it without my masks.
As
Yeah?
you, yourself.
As me. And as you might have guessed, like I can be controversial from here to Timbuktu. Not in a bad way, but because society wants people to be prim and proper. You want me to be smiling and look nice even when I'm in such deep pain.
Yeah.
You want to step on my toes and have me say some more, please, not react. And not even react, not respond. If I tell you, Juliet, you've stepped on my toes, it's marked as being abrasive. And so at 37, I've made peace. I have honestly made peace with being considered abrasive. If being abrasive is if what you think is me being abrasive is what will keep me safe from toxicity. Yeah? So my sister coming in meant that I could release parenting. She at the age of 20 what? I think she had just turned 24.
She became a co-parent.
No, she became a parent. Me, my children, msichana wa kazi, the pets. She became the decision maker in the family because of two things. I realized I was very angry. I was so bitter. I was so angry. I felt cheated out of that period of time. I felt misunderstood because people, my former colleagues, some of the people I had worked with in the church before, not particularly the church where I went, but people that had been in my life as colleagues, in the vineyard, were faster and quicker to tell me that I would regret, that my decision to walk away from the marriage would cost me eternity, than they were to find out what exactly, how did we get to this point, And people were so busy, even on my socials, as soon as the status changed, and people were busy talking about God hates divorce and all of this. And I will not deny any of those things, But you know what, Julia, I want to believe that God cares more about me as a person, as his child, than he cares about my marital status. I think it matters more. His creation matters more than whether my marriage certificate is valid or not,
Yeah.
And the love and the concern didn't easily come. And there was also a lot of we saw it coming. You know those people like,
Yes.
in mother tongue, we had seen it. We had seen it coming. And I'm thinking, you're my family. You're articulating an incident that proved that this would fall apart, and you didn't tell me. You let me walk into it when you could see danger. You didn't bother asking me, baby girl, there are red flags. Are you seeing these red flags?
Yeah.
Are you seeing them? Only one person in my life was bold enough to tell me 2 weeks before the wedding, there are red flags. I said, but I love him. So there's that part, yeah?
Yes.
I was angry. I was bitter. Oh man, I could not trust people around me, just not even men, like generally. I would look at people and I'd just be suspicious. You're plotting something for me. And you see, in the first year, for a period of that year of separation, I was away. I was in the town where I used to live at the time, yeah? So until I came back to Thika. And then coming back to Thika was different. Because mama is a few minutes away to start. And you just want to run to mom when and I mean, my story can't be told without talking about how absolutely how amazing my mom and my siblings and actually my family has been. Because with them, it was very direct questions. Did this happen? Did this happen? Was there violence? Yeah, us. That's where we are. Let's wait for the conversation. But with my mom and my siblings, there was never a period when I felt like coming back home was a mistake or leaving my marriage was a mistake. The questions that they had, we sat and they asked those questions in a way that didn't leave me feeling unvalidated. They validated my fears at that point, because immediately the first year I was so scared. Like I could not sleep. And unfortunately, a few months after about a month after separation, and I'm getting used to being the head of the household, thugs came and broke in. And I woke up in the middle of the night and there are people in my room. And so you're coming from having constant protection
Yes.
to you being the protector, and you can't even protect your people because all you could do was hide under the duvet when thugs came. And then to all of these other things happening. But coming back home was nice.
It was.
Yeah, it was.
And we thank God. I mean, you came back home and you were able to recollect yourself.
Yes, yes. And burn all my masks.
And you did.
Oh.
No, this is you. This is the real you.
Mimi, what you see is what you get. I do
Awesome.
not do masks.
Awesome. You know, we could talk all day because there's
Forever,
a lot. There's
forever,
a lot. There's a lot
forever,
that you
you
can
know?
tell us.
Yeah.
And we want to thank you so much for allowing yourself to be vulnerable within such short notice.
Thank you.
And talking
Thank
to
you.
us.
Thank you.
Now, as we come to
A close.
the conclusion of this discussion, this wonderful discussion, we have seen a spate of killings that has been going on around the country. That is family member to family member, husband killing the wife, or the wife killing herself and the children.
or even husband.
You know, it's not a stranger coming into your house and killing you. It's somebody who you've shared a bed with for the longest time, and you turn against each other. You being in an abusive marriage and having been able to pluck yourself from it and pick pieces, what advice would you give people out there so that we avoid seeing all these things
This
that
thing
we are
happen.
doing? Or as a society, where have we gone wrong? Why are we not seeing these red flags?
Oof. As a society, that's a deep one. As a society, we lost feelings. You just have to look at our social media to see. We have lost humanity completely. Let me digress. You see, I watched the skits where, what are they called? Pranks. The shows that come on TV, pranks. And you look at the prank, and it could actually be a real thing happening. It could actually be a person being kidnapped. And people just sit and stare.
And it's in broad daylight.
Exactly, you know? And that just goes to show you, we have lost humanity. So it's not about red flags. We see red flags. But because we've lost humanity, where do I go as a girl leaving my marriage? I was able to leave my marriage because I did not consult. That's the easiest way for me to put it, yeah? When I had gotten to the point where I realized that the choice was between life and life. Because I wasn't going to die. My babies were still young. So it was either between an empty life and a full life, like me just living to the fullest. Nobody can make that decision for you. But then as someone who's been there, the hardest part is when people ask, mbona hatoki? Mbona hatoki? I went back twice after, and when I left, there was no violence. When I should have left, I did not leave. And the first time, like I said, I felt sorry for him. The thing about abuse is this: abuse has a process to it. People don't just slap you. That slap is a long time coming. There is a grooming process that happens. An abuser will ensure that they take away your support system. So that's one key thing. If you and I are buddies, and then suddenly you don't get to see me, or you begin to notice like nimejiondoa, our social circles, you have that one friend who you're always with, but now all of a sudden after she got this boyfriend or she got this husband, you're hardly ever seeing her. Pause and ask, baby girl, are you okay?
Yeah.
But remember, when you're asking someone whether they're okay, you have to have checked yourself to see whether you're actually a safe space. I've talked about my siblings and my mom. Those were my safe space. My children have grown into becoming my safe space, and I am their safe space. I walk around as a safe space, and that's why I told you I don't do masks. Because what you see is what you get. I walk around as a safe space so that if today I'm called that Juliet ABCD has happened in a house, baby, I'll come for you. Usiku, not for fighting, but because you need to understand that yourself, you're not entirely there. A part of you has been removed. And then let's stop asking people to pray for abusive marriages. Like if really you honestly believe prayer is the answer, you uncle, you auntie, you mom, you dad, first get on your knees and pray for your daughter's marriage. And then let's see whether then the combined efforts will work.
Yeah.
But you can't keep sending people back to their death. You can't send people back to ulcers. I was on a special diet thanks to ulcers, gastritis as a result of stress. I constantly in hospital because of asthmatic attacks as well. And then you're still reading scriptures. And here's the question: if you're gonna send someone to pray, how about you send the abuser then? Because clearly they need the prayers. This other person is a victim or being abused. Also, you can't ask someone who's abused to justify their abuse. Sometimes abuse is not visible. Not every form of abuse is marked by a scar or a wound. Just because I'm not bleeding does not mean I'm not hurting. And psychological, emotional, and mental abuse is worse. I'm not saying physical abuse is better, but with physical abuse, you walk in with a black eye and automatically I will ask, what's happening with you? What's going on? But you see, with mental, emotional, psychological abuse, you don't get to see these things unless you're very observant, and then you begin to notice that there's a change, or this person is no longer happy. My most liked photo on Facebook was posted in August of 2016. I was dying. I wanted to die. I wanted nothing more than to die. But people came on and they said, beautiful. And to date, it is my most liked photo. I went through life hosting a show, standing on the pulpit. A few people knew something was wrong, but the rest of the world didn't. So when I finally walked away, people asked, wow, that nice guy, that you get. So emotional wounds cannot be seen to the physical eye. You have to be deliberate about it. And that means you have to pay attention to your loved ones. If your sister is no longer coming home for Christmas, uliza, wacha aseme uko na kiherehere. But when that day comes and things go wrong, you will not go back to that person and say, I told you so. Then the last thing probably I'd say is that you talked about red flags. Sometimes you might see red flags in my relationship that I am blinded to. Remember, mzungu alituambia love is blind. When you love someone, it's very easy to overlook. I saw the red. If I was to be very, very careful, I should have known I'd get hit by the time I was 21. All the signs were there. That one day, it will no longer be the door that is punched. It will no longer be the wall. It will no longer be the tree outside. It will be my face. But I loved him. He stayed with me at a point when society says boys walk away. I came pregnant, told him I was pregnant. Not one day did he ask me, ama niko sure mimbani yake. He stood as I was getting a baby. So I overlooked the red flags. My point is this: if you see a situation, if you see something that is so clearly wrong in a friend's relationship, and I know women, we are sensitive, we don't want to be told ni wivu. But you know what, when that day comes, you will be the easiest person for that person to call because you spoke. Because the person who spoke about my situation 2 weeks before was the easiest person, has been my sounding board to date. When I don't understand dating as an adult, because it's difficult, yeah, I go to him. When I don't understand, when the panic attacks became too much, I went to him. He is my godfather and he's a psychiatrist, so he looked after all of us with the panic attacks. So if you're seeing, kama unajua that mtu mkikasirishana mtu hafai kuachanishwa stage and then you witness a friend ameachanishwa stage, call her for coffee, not with ujuaji, and just say I care about you. How you phrase it matters. But I observed this and I do not think you deserve that. I think you deserve better. Please note, like, I'm not telling you to leave this person, but I am saying this is not correct treatment.
Sure.
Because even for me, it took someone pointing it out for it to be real. So you can't nyamaza and then later, when your friend has been beaten, is in hospital, or even worse, has been murdered, you start saying niliona tu. And don't sing watachana. Tell them why you're seeing dalili of them kuachana.
Yeah.
Because if someone had categorically done that for me, 14 and a half years. But let me also say this, I do not regret my 14 and a half years, because to regret my 14 and a half years would be regretting my kids.
Okay.
And that I can't do. And it's also important for me to say I do not hate my ex-husband. My divorce is not finalized. He has moved on and I'm very proud of him, and I really hope he finds happiness, because there's not going to be happiness this side, yeah?
Okay.
There's no rewinding, you know. But I do not hate him. There are days when I am upset over things he's done, but it's hard to hate someone that you've loved from when you were 19 to when you were 33. You can't just stop and say, oh my God, now I hate him. No, I don't.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We need to wind up the
Yes,
show
we
now.
do.
You could
Yes, we
preach.
do. I used to.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
for
your
having me.
time.
Thank you for having
We are
me.
going to have many more discussions, and thank you so much for
Thank you.
enlightening us
Thank
about
you.
a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Wanjiku Ngedha, who has given us her story. She has been able to conquer a lot, and we hope that you have learned a thing or two. I have been your host, Juliet Modhoni. Remember, you're watching 3T TV, Thika's #1 online news channel, where as always, we are telling the Thika story as it is. Until next time, take care.